Okay, what's your name? What's your name?
I don't need to tell you my name. This is a federal stop.
But what do you want?
I'm not.
Federal why?
Doesn't matter. Open the window so I can see you.
My window's open,
Okay,
dude.
I need your ID.
Okay, you back
Everybody's
up.
ID. I need all the windows down so I can see. I don't know nobody else.
Man,
Doesn't
there's
matter
no
what-
I don't give a what you say either,
so
bro.
Open the window.
Touch me, bro.
Open
bro. The window's open, bro.
I can't.
The window's open, bro.
I need to see in the back.
The window's open,
lower
bro.
All the windows.
I want to see the warrant. You just gotta see how they're gonna come in. They don't want to show us the warrant. They don't want to show us the warrant.
Give me another gram, please.
We have to see the warrant.
Ma'am, you're watching too much movies.
Good morning. Excuse me, do you guys have a warrant sign?
Yes, we do. Get out of here.
Could you show me it, please?
Who are you? Get out of here.
Why would I show you my warrant?
Wow. All right. Welcoming to the bullpen, we have Miss Agustina Vergara, who happens to be a former immigrant turned immigration law expert and has an interesting perspective. Good to have you on the program, Miss Sid. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Richey. I'm really happy to be here.
Let's talk about the shift. The irony is that while most of the stories and headlines focuses on some of the most egregious things we have seen in modern context as it relates to American immigration policy, but when polled, the average American now is starting to shift toward favoring immigration or immigrants, which is contrary to the messaging of the current administration. Tell us about this shift.
Yeah, so I think part of what's responsible for the shift is that, well, first of all, I think that Americans, generally speaking, have always been welcoming of immigrants at the individual level, let's say, right? So when the vast majority of Americans meet an immigrant and they talk to them and they found out that most immigrants come here, to build a life and to pursue work, they're actually really welcoming of immigrants. They're like, okay, you come here in peace, you come here to work, welcome home. That has actually been my experience as an immigrant who came here from Argentina 8 years ago. And I think that, and that is kind of like contradictory to, they elect Donald Trump, who ran on the campaign of, mass deportations. But I think that issue happens, that seeming contradiction happens when, they fall prey to this, tribalistic and collectivistic rhetoric that politicians push. Part of what Trump did is say, like, immigrants are criminals, and they are such a threat to America. And America is, in the verge of collapse because of these immigrants. And that is actually not true, but it instilled fear on many Americans. And then they turn against immigration, let's say collectively. But when they meet an immigrant, that sentiment shifts. And I think that part of what happened here, this shift in the last year, where there's record high support for immigration, I think part of what happened is Americans have started seeing what mass deportation actually means, which is essentially a state, a police state that is hunting down people on the street. And it turns out that those people they're hunting down on the street are not these criminals and gang members and whatnot, but they are actually their neighbors, their friends, the people that they see every day at the store. So and they are realizing now that those people are actually of value to them, and they're like, oh well, no, this is not what I want. I actually support immigration.
Let me read a couple of stats, and I think this is going to be surprising for many. So you have new polling data that shows as of June through July 2025, nearly 79% of Americans now say immigration is a good thing. This is up sharply from the same polling data just a couple of years prior, which had the number in the 60s. You also have deportation. So the number of individuals supporting deportation has plunged from 55% of Americans at one time in recent history saying they support deportation. And now that number has dropped to only 30% of Americans who are supportive of deportation. That is a direct, in my opinion, a direct cause and effect from the administration being brutal. The policy is brutal. The agents have on masks. They're locking up college students in doctoral programs. And if you happen to say something adversarial in a op-ed about the administration or America or a policy, you become a target. These things just don't sit right with us, period. And I'm glad to report that the numbers moving in the right direction, but really we should all be unified on this. What's happening, and this is just a question that maybe you can answer, maybe you can't. But what is happening inside of the immigrant community, especially my brown brothers and sisters who supported Trump and realize now he's a charlatan, or perhaps they still support Trump, even with the rhetoric and the extreme violations that he provides on a constant basis against not only immigrant communities, but others?
Well, I can't speak for let's say the immigrant community, but what I've observed in some cases is that many people who voted for Trump because they fell prey to this discourse of, we're gonna get rid of all the criminals, and there are these incredibly dangerous gang members roaming every single street of America. That's essentially the message, which is not true. I'm not saying there weren't any gang members, but it was completely blown out of proportion, in my opinion. But they bought that, right? And they trusted the politician who told them this is actually true, and your life is going to be so much better when we kick these people out. But now they are realizing that that was a lie, and that actually ICE is not going after any of, or almost any of those quote, dangerous criminals, but they're going after the peaceful people that are literally just came here to work. There's a recent study that the Cato Institute did, I think it was in June as well, which found that about 65% of the people that ICE has detained and or already deported are people who have zero criminal record, nothing, not a traffic ticket we're talking about. So now they're realizing that, and they are realizing as well, because I think there is a lot of these, well, that's not gonna happen to me or my family. So there's a lot of mixed status families, someone who may be a citizen, but their parents may not be a citizen and may be present in America without papers. When they then realize, oh, they want to deport my mom, they want to deport my grandma, they want to deport my siblings. They thought they wouldn't go after them because they're peaceful people. But of course, the question I asked to those people that thought that was, what did you think mass deportation was gonna look like? This is what mass deportation looks like.
That's correct. Mass deportation can't look like anything else because you don't have the majority of individuals of any group committing crime. So if they're saying that we're going to do a mass anything with you, that means not a small amount. And I'm glad you noted the 65% because it's an interesting number. Out of all groups in the United States of America, all demographics, the least likely to offend demographic based on statistical data is, in fact, an immigrant of undocumented status in the United States of America based on current statistics. That number isn't echoed enough. And also the support it provides the American economy and dynamics such as, well, if you happen to be undocumented, you get arrested, sometimes bring a camera, but the person that hired you, they're breaking the same federal law technically. They don't go to jail. They may get a civil fine of that. So you have this narrative with the immigrant community now is happening, it's televised. Is there a shift in the political and the policy formatting of their belief in Trump, for Trump, and with the Republican Party?
So when it comes to our politicians, unfortunately, with what we've seen that this mass deportations agenda looks like, and I have to clarify something here. Trump, in many respects, is actually following the law. So it is doing by pursuing some of these deportations, is actually following what Congress has mandated the executive to do, which is incredibly worrisome. Not just worrisome, but it's a wake-up call for Americans that this has been the law. What Trump is doing now, to a large extent, is pushing the law to its largest extent and cranking up the most possible cruelty he can extract from the law in order to execute his mass deportations agenda. That said, he's also doing things that, in my opinion, are straight up lawless. For instance, sending asylum people with pending asylum claims i.e. people present in America legally, to a third world country, to a prison, to be essentially tortured, as we now know, to El Salvador for 4 months without any sort of due process whatsoever. Those things are definitely lawless, but many others are just, following the law. And what really worries me, and I am so ashamed of our political class, is that Trump's, like, the Republicans are turning a blind eye to this. They are not complaining about, they're not pushing back against this. They're like, oh, well, but they were illegals, as they call the illegals, and somehow the illegals don't have rights, as if our Constitution discriminated within, citizens and non-citizens, which is does not. That's what worries me. Our politicians, even I think some Democrats, I don't think they really are grasping and doing enough given the gravity of this situation, which is unprecedented in American history.
That's correct. God made no human being illegal. And you have a narrative from the administration that's really a proxy for a power grab. In the 60s, it was black men. Yeah, that's your enemy. And they utilized the drug narrative and the crime narrative to fuel the narrative of black men being degenerate somehow. And today in 2025, we are still overcoming that narrative to a large degree. So they have done this. This is an old play out of a playbook.
Can I add something about what you just said, Dr.
Yes, absolutely.
It's valuable. First, regarding this narrative, I agree. And like in immigration history, this has happened a lot. Remember, we had the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882.
Yeah, the Exclusion Act, that's right.
Yeah, which stigmatized Chinese immigrants and actually made it impossible for the vast majority of them to come to America. And then in 1924, we had the Johnson-Reed Act, which excluded large parts of Europeans and all Asians based on eugenics, right? And eugenics obviously is, this form of racism and collectivism that has zero base in science or reality. But then we had that system until basically 1965. So, and the other thing that you said I think is interesting is, I think you put it something like, this is like framing this as an emergency or something like that. And I think that is one of the other aspects of this immigration enforcement that we're seeing with the Trump administration. I think the Trump administration, with these, parades essentially of ICE agents, dressed in military costumes and, descending from military trucks and heavily armed to detain what literally sometimes is a DoorDash delivery driver. I think part of what this wants to do is it wants to make it seem, like this is an actual emergency, that if this person doesn't get detained now, this DoorDash worker, by this heavily armed military guy, the country is gonna explode. And that obviously is not true. But what is the goal here? To frame it as this emergency, because if people working peacefully in America, which is the vast majority of people, if that is an emergency, what isn't an emergency? What else is the government gonna ask of us to be okay with that this is an emergency? It's a power grab, and they are unfortunately succeeding, and it's going to become normalized. It's going to become normalized that we're gonna have agents dressed in military fatigues detaining peaceful people trying to work. And I really, really, really want to push against that, because that absolutely cannot happen in America.
And I will say this, I disagree with one point, but I understand why you submitted it. It will not be normalized on our watch. And the reason it will not be normalized is because we have fighters like you. It will not be normalized because I got polling data that says 79% of Americans have shifted to now be in favor of immigrants, and the number of Americans that they were in favor of deportation at 55%, that number has dropped to 30%. And I think that number is going to drop even more. And for those who are watching, remember, he's just a man. That's all he is. And as I say, and I mean, he's barely that. But he's just a man. He's one person. One. You are many. And it's about your vision for the future of this nation, the future of your family, and the future of how policy unravels. Dear sister, thank you for being on the program. Tell people how they can follow you, check out your work.
Yes, they can Google my name, Agustina Vergara, and they'll find me on socials or on Twitter and Instagram. I'm Agustina V Cid, CID. You can find me there, and then if you Google, if you find my socials, you'll see my talks and articles and podcast episodes as well.
Very fine to have you. Hope you come back. Thank you for all you do.
I would love to come back. Thank you so much, Dr. Richey.
Absolutely.